Good morning. A warm welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley's Sunday Forum to those joining us this morning. My name is Ray Sunby, President of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a secular and reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, fairness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist community if you have not yet done so. A special welcome to those who are with us for the first time. We invite you to continue listening to our weekly forums and other events. Please aid us in continuing to present these forums by donating to the Humanist community. Membership forms, a list of upcoming events, information about donating to the Humanist community, and other information can be found on our website.
All right. My name is Alex Havasi. I'm Vice President of the Humanist community, and we'll have a talk today from David Rice, who will present a vision for growing the secular movement. Oh, okay. Carl, did you want to introduce our speaker?
Oh, certainly. Yes. Our speaker for this morning is Dave Rice. I'm going to read a bit of his background and then we'll let him speak for himself. But for the past 25 years, ever since converting from evangelical Christianity to humanism, he has become increasingly involved in helping the secular movement push forward. This has led to a number of different activities, including helping form and lead a coalition of secular groups in Southern California, Socal Secular Coalition, including planning 2 annual leadership summits and a first virtual conference, becoming president of the United Nations Association, Orange County chapter. Let's see here, starting a local secular community groups that meet weekly, creating and working on strategic plan for the secular movement, meeting with leaders of various national secular organizations, and joining the board of the Humanist Association of Orange County, California. So please welcome Dave, and let's hear from him.
Thank you very much, Carl. And it's a pleasure to be with everybody today. Thanks for joining. I want to also just recognize and say hey to Judy Flattery, who some of you have already seen. She is the president of the Santa Barbara Humanist Association. I guess it's called the Humanist Society of Santa Barbara, to be exact. And also Margaret Downey's with us. Don't know if you folks know Margaret. She is the president of the Free Thought Society and has been an active member in the secular movement for many, many years, and really, knows far more than I do about the movement. So anyways, Margaret, welcome. And also Daniel Graves. I see Daniel, and Daniel, I know you're in LA and have been in several of our leadership summits in Southern Cal. So welcome. Those are the folks I recognize. But I've also had the pleasure of being with many of you on some of your discussion forums and some of your events. It's been fun to reach out and join you. And, I'm just so impressed with the group that you have, with the level of discussions that you have, the videos and the movies that you see, the book discussions. It's really a good group. So anyway, I'm honored to, I've been asked to just talk with you a little bit about my perceptions of where we are with the secular movement, which is a passion of mine. And then I've got some comments that I'll go through that'll take probably close to about half an hour. And then I'd love to open it up for discussion and for Q&A, for equally as long or longer if you'd like, if that fits your time schedule. But I'm as interested in learning what your observations are and thoughts are as in sharing some of my thoughts. So
don't talk. Wait for me to get out.
So just, just to add to what Carl shared with my background. So my parents were missionaries in China, Japan, Taiwan. I actually grew up in Taiwan. I was there for a dozen years through high school with a few years in LA. And then ended up going to Westmont College. It's in Santa Barbara. It's a Christian college, majored in psychology, was going to go get a master's degree in counseling, and then decided close to finishing that up that that wasn't where I wanted to spend my career and life. And so I decided the tech world was pretty interesting back then, and got on board with IBM and spent 13 years with IBM back in the 80s and the early 90s when they were sort of in the mainframe world. And it was a really interesting experience. They were also going through a major transition at the time, as many of you, I'm sure, in the Bay Area there, if you're involved in technology, we're also familiar with that time where everything transformed from basically hardware focuses to software to services. And you know, they were going through that, and that led me to the whole area of organizational change. And so I became pretty involved in the idea of organizational change, and that's sort of stayed with me throughout my career. I went then to another company after them, a company called ComDiscos, is for computer discounts. Some of you may remember them. They were a fairly large company in tech, and also got very involved with them in their organizational change and transition and transformation. And then was with a few other tech companies, mostly smaller software companies, and then consulted for about a dozen years, mostly helping small businesses with growth. And so the idea of organizational change and growth has been pretty core to a lot of my background. And I started the business that I started was actually called Goals, Goals, Growing Organizations and Leveraging Sales. I did that up until a few years ago. I had also started, I'm an avid soccer fan and played in college, and I started a soccer league for adults a dozen years ago with about 4 teams, and that kept growing. And so about a couple of years ago, it became so large, I left you know, everything else I was doing to focus on that. It takes about half my time. We're now up to about 40 teams and about 1,000 folks playing soccer every week in Southern California, South Orange County, where I'm at. And I just came from that. We play every Sunday morning. And the rest of my time, then, that's afforded me the ability to really commit to a couple of key passion areas in the nonprofit space. And really the main key is the secular movement. So that's been a really interesting, you know, I would say, time to try to understand what's happening out there, try to meet folks in different groups. And then that's also led me to my role with the United Nations Association. Carl mentioned that I became president of the Orange County chapter, and they're very related, and we'll talk about that some more as we get going. But so, you know, I wanted to go ahead and let me do a screen share and pull up. Oh, I'm disabled, so I need to just be able to share a screen. Whoever can do that for me.
Try again.
Okay. And there we go. Okay, can everybody see that all right? Is everybody able to see the screen okay?
Yes,
Yeah.
we see it.
Okay, great. Okay. So yeah, you know, I'm super interested in where we are as a movement today, and what is it going to take us to the next level or two. I would be fascinated actually to, I'm fascinated in comparing our movement to earlier movements that we've probably all seen or witnessed or been a part of. The civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the LGBTQ movement, which probably is one of the most relevant recent movements that we could learn much from. And it would be fascinating to actually, I'd love to take a class in these movements and to understand what were some of the key milestones and what were some of the key factors and sort of critical success factors, if you will, that helped move them along to achieve their goals. And that's one of the interesting things, you know, what even would we say is our goal as a movement, right? I'm not sure. I think if we asked everybody here on the call, we'd get a lot of different answers on that. So that's one of the things we probably want to deal with. So as we just look at the talk today, I thought we'd talk about, let's define what we mean by secular. It means different things sometimes to different people. How large is this group in the US? Where are we today with the movement? And how do we move our groups, our various secular groups, towards more engagement? I think that's something that, as I sense from just being with and talking to a number of different groups, that we're all interested in, is not just membership, but how do we get members who are engaged and really wanted to do some things and make a difference? And then let's talk about our allies. What other groups are out there that we probably, if we're not already aligned with, want to be thinking about? And then what can each of us do personally to become more engaged? And then just a list of resources. So if we talk about secular, pretty much everybody agrees that fundamentally it just means not religious. When we refer to something secular, it's really, not having to do with religion of any kind. There's another side meaning that sort of just has to do with relating to the physical world and not the spiritual world. And this opens it up a little bit in terms of its definition to identifying people who identify as religious, but still are fundamentally secular in their values and their lifestyle. And they subscribe to the core values of reason and science, responsibility, etc. And I think it's an interesting thought to really try and figure out how large is that group. I think there's probably a lot. I think many of us probably feel like there's a lot of folks that fall in this bucket, if you will. But when we think about just secular generally, we're really talking about not church, not religion, might want to call it state, might want to call it public. And so Phil Zuckerman, who many of you I'm sure know, who's the professor of secular studies. He started the first secular studies department out of Pomona-Pitzer College, and has written a number of books. He's, fantastic. I'm sure if you haven't had a chance to hear him, hopefully you will. We've got some, Carl mentioned in the bio, the first annual conference that our Southern California Secular Coalition just put on in November. And I will put in, and actually, Judy, if you have the links to the videos for that and want to put those in the chat, that would be great. If not, I've got them and can put them in when we're done. But Phil was one of our speakers, and I would encourage everybody to just click on his brief presentation on this topic, because he's written books on it, and has as a sociologist. Has a lot to say about this topic. But one of the distinctions he makes is the difference between secular people who are out there just living their normal lives. He grew up watching the Brady Bunch. They never mentioned religion. They always just kind of live their lives. And then secularists, who are people probably like most of us who are somewhat activated by our secularism and identify with secular groups. But it's an interesting thing when we look at the studies so far, and they just identify as non-religious or nuns, as they've come to be known. That doesn't necessarily tell us everything we might want to know about who, in fact, is secular out there, right? Or who identifies as secular. It just says they're not religious or don't identify as religious. And as we'll see, that number is certainly growing exponentially these days. So I think in our census and our polls, we do need better categories and better definitions to identify folks. I'd love to see, atheist, agnostic, humanist, all of these would be good to have. So if we do talk about the size of the group, I think most of us probably know that it has grown exponentially. I mean, the nuns back in 1960, only 4% of the country identified as non-religious. And today it's up between 25 and 30% across the board. And then among young people, it's over 50% that identify as non-religious, 10% as atheists. So we are seeing here in the US explosive growth, also in other countries as well. At the same time, most of the religions are declining in numbers. There are a number of societies where the majority are now non-religious. You can see them here: Scotland, Netherlands, Czech, Estonia, Japan, South Korea. In the UK, 20% identify actually as humanists. I think we're only about 5 or 6% here in the US, about the same as religious. And then China has the highest number of non-religious folks in its country at 90%, followed by Sweden, Czech, UK, and Netherlands. And yet, when you look at it, there's all of this growth happening in the non-religious, but the number of active secularists, I think we would all agree, is still relatively small. Most of our groups are pretty small, right? I mean, by maybe comparison to some other groups that are out there, let's say. The AHA, as you can see at my note at the bottom, currently has, American Humanist Association has somewhere between 35 and 45,000 members, official members. And I just think that's, crazy. I mean, in a country of 300 million people, where 25 to 30% identify as non-religious, it seems like we should certainly have a much higher number of active folks who want to promote the great values of humanism out there and everything else that goes along with it. So my sense is that our movement hasn't yet hit its stride. It's not where it can be. I feel like there's been growth, and that's great. But we're not where I'd certainly, and I think probably most of us would like to see it today still. And what are some of the issues there? Well, it's a little hard to define what characterizes people who identify as secular. Again, many people are just living normal lives. They would say they're secular. They're not really that engaged in being secularists or in, fighting for our values or even for church-state separation. And then there's others who, truly look to find meaning in their lives and want to make the world better. And it's not, it may be just through some charity cause. Some have experienced religion and have had negative or very difficult traumatic experiences even, and coming out of it are experiencing almost PTSD-like symptoms, family separation from friends, and we have a Recovering from Religion organization just to help folks like that. But there's a number of folks there. Many of them often are a little more attracted to the atheist groups and groups that maybe want to debate more the existence of God, etc. And then some consider themselves religious, but are fundamentally secular. So I'm particularly interested in, have been trying to reach out to the Unitarian Universalist churches in our area. We have 5 here in Orange County. I've been having lunch regularly with one of their senior folks who's been a pastor at most of their churches. And what we find is that most of the people in these churches actually identify as humanists. They actually, some of them identify as atheists. Not too many of them really would label themselves much differently than that. It's just that some of us get hung up because they may use some kind of language that sounds spiritual at times. And but I think they're definitely would fall in our camp fundamentally. And then I think the biggest group clearly today that's out there that would be in our, if you will, population would be young people. So, young people are interested in social issues. They're interested in climate and the environment. They're interested in women's reproductive rights and gun limits and social justice, anti-racism, gay rights, even animal rights, and a whole host of other issues. And so I think that's for us something, that's the challenge, and to think about how we really can address, their interests and concerns. One of the issues is that the secular organizations that have developed out there haven't really been able yet to effectively organize into a unified movement with clear goals that all share. So we have 15 to 20 national organizations. I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with most of them. We talked about American Humanist Association, there's Secular Coalition of America, Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, and then a whole string of other groups. They're all concerned with their own members because they're nonprofits. They're all concerned with their donors. I think there's a reluctance to share sometimes because of those issues. but also have each has their own sort of specific focus. Some are more involved in lawsuits. Some are more involved in advocacy and in our politics. Some are more, involved in just promoting humanism. So, but that's been yet, I think, a roadblock of our inability to maybe make more strides. So it feels like we do need more coalition building among our groups with common purposes and goals. And that's really the reason that we started the coalition down in Southern Cal, is to try to bring groups together so that we could have strength in numbers and share resources, share speakers, share a lot of things, but also potentially have a bigger impact on local issues. Other measures of success of a movement growing would be where we would see a true support out there for church-state separation in our government, in our schools, in our public life. Today, it almost seems like things are going the opposite way after what we've just been through with the Trump administration, with putting a very conservative members on not only the Supreme Court, but on in other courts of law. There's a big push for private education, for religious schools, for vouchers. And it's very difficult still for anybody in politics to actively promote their non-religiosity, although that is changing. And we have now the Free Thought Caucus, which if you haven't had a chance to yet have either Jared Huffman, who's from California and a co-founder of that, or Jamie Raskin from Maryland, who is the other co-founder, talk to the organization. I'd really encourage that. I think it's one of the most exciting things happening in our movement today. And we really need to support them. And they're up to about 15 congressional members now, representatives that are part of that caucus. And in my resources tab at the end, I have a whole list of links, and I can share that with you and maybe put them in the chat as well, so that you don't have to scramble and look for everything. But I've got that as well. Secular organizations and people seen as leaders for human rights issues and solving social problems. That would be great if that were us. One of the things I have and will share is a list of the Forbes top 100 charities, nonprofits. And there is not one organization in there that identifies as a secular organization. There are probably at least 25% that identify as religious organizations, maybe more, it's about a third. So that would be, I think, a symbol or a sign of a win for us, or of success in our movement. And then overall, just general awareness, more awareness of humanism and its values, let alone adoption of it, right? How many of us talk to friends and we'll say, well, I'm a humanist, and they'll say, well, what's that? I've never heard of that, right? So we've got a ways to go. So where are we today with humanism? We're a humanist group here in Silicon Valley. We've got humanist, groups around the country. Some are doing maybe a little better membership-wise than others, but in my sense of it, most still continue to sort of struggle really expanding and really getting engaged in their local communities. However, there is some good news, and the Secular Coalition of America, as I mentioned, is really making some inroads in Congress, not only with their own legal resources, but also now they are merging legal resources with those of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, and others. So that's a really good sign to see those resources coming together and working together on important church-state separation issues. The Free Thought Caucus, as I mentioned, one of the most important, I think, developments going on. These other national organizations, I mean, if you go to the SCA website, Secular Coalition, and click under the members, they're all listed there as members, and it's a good way to really get a handle on who else is out there and what they're about. The coalition that we mentioned, that we've talked about, I think was really in many ways viewed in my mind as a pilot to try and see if we can, have an effective way to bring groups together. And I will tell you, and we'll have some discussion about this, and I'd love to hear from Judy and Daniel and Margaret as well, but it's not easy. And there are a number of groups still who do not, for one reason or another, really care to participate. And so you just have that. That's just out there. but it doesn't mean that, you don't try and you push forward. I think another important thing happening is that we're more and more open to the interfaith movement. More and more of us are engaged in interfaith discussions. We want a seat at that table. To be honest, many interfaith groups are a little nervous about they're not interested in having atheists much, because that's sort of anti what they're about, but they are interested and don't really know much about having a humanist at the table. And so I think there's a good opportunity to get engaged with the interfaith, and we find a lot of commonality and similar value sharing. Certainly a respect for all belief systems, which is core to one of our core values, right? And then I mentioned the UU churches as well. So these are all positive movements. Well, what does the movement need? We need recognition. We need an identity, a purpose. We need messaging that is succinct and makes sense, and that we can all sort of agree on. I think today, probably the best tagline out there that's being used is "Good without God." It's not bad, but I'm not sure that's it. So I think we'd all have some opinions about it. It might be worth talking about in our discussion. But we need something where we can sort of coalesce around a message. There are some new platforms developing on social media. Not sure if any of you have seen the Only Sky platform, onlysky.media. But that is an exciting new development where basically they have reached out to every major, well, not every, but many major secular authors and content providers, and are aggregating all of their content onto one site. And they're putting out a lot of good information. So definitely encourage you to check that out and become a part of that. They're presenting it as an open forum and an open discussion. It's actually was started by somebody in the Bay Area. I think it's Sean Harden, I think is his name. It's exciting. It's pretty new. And then I think it would be helpful for the movement to have a goal, a reach goal, something that would be difficult to obtain. Most movements that are successful had that. Whether they got it or not, it helped move them forward and propel them forward. When you think of the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, I mean, it's hard to believe that the Equal Rights Amendment still isn't there, but it was a reach goal, and it's done a lot to coalesce the movement. The LGBTQ movement had marriage equality as a goal, and my understanding is they did not think they would achieve that goal, not in nearly the time frame that it actually got achieved. But because they got a lot of help from Hollywood, especially from movies, from the entertainment industry, really had a huge impact in helping change the hearts and minds of many Americans about why there needs to be full acceptance of the LGBT movement. And so for us, it feels to me like the marketing aspect of our movement is really lacking. And we just need a better way to market ourselves. And that starts, in my view, with a strategic plan that really kind of lays everything out. What's our market? What is our messaging? What's our value proposition? How are we going to go do these? What are the initiatives that we need to undertake? Who's going to do what? And then, get to the key influencers. We need some spokespeople, right? We need well-known figures and spokespeople to sign up and say, this is, I'm all about this movement. This is why it's important. We have some. We have Bill Maher out there, Jon Stewart at some level, John Oliver. I mean, I think they're out there, but we probably want to find ways to engage them more and to even extend that more, because there's no question that most in that industry are secular in their values and in their worldviews. And then, I think as we expand just out of our own sort of secular only groups, but to these other sort of call them allies groups, the interfaith and other groups that can really help promote what we're about. And then the cool thing is, and why this is, why I've got the big wave there, is that it really is a wave happening, right? There is a wave going on that, apart from any of us, is just occurring. And there's so many people that are out there that are struggling with these issues of religion and realizing that it falls short, but they don't really have the alternatives, and they don't have they like what they're getting with community. They have a lot there. There's a lot to give up. And so there doesn't seem to be, a good place for them to go necessarily. So a lot of folks out there, probably more, probably way more than 25 to 30% of the country, that really somehow fall into the boat of living their lives with secular values and not being directed by outside or external values coming to them from some source like the Bible. Okay, so how do we move our groups forward? One of the things we've adopted, and don't know if you folks are familiar with the CASE sort of model, but it's, we really think that it's in every group's best interest to try to promote community, bigger community, more community. That's social groups, movie night groups, all kinds of activities, hiking groups and everything else, ways to build community apart from just our meetings. And then to become very involved in advocacy with church-state separation, with getting involved in local politics in particular, our city councils, our school boards, they're largely conservative and need, they're driving conservative values that are not in line with our progressive values of openness and, really seeking science and reason in our education. And then, the whole service aspect, getting involved in solving social problems, again, has been historically in the domain of many religious groups, whether it's orphanages, charities, nonprofit, all of this over there. And as I said, the Fortune 100, top 100 nonprofits, 25%, 30% are religious oriented. So I think there's a real need, and this is where young people are today. They're really interested in these social problems. And so it's a great way for us to engage and become more engaged there. Most of us have done a pretty good job on the education side. I'd say that's where most of our groups have tended to be and still are today. But we're encouraging our groups as much as possible to try to focus on and expand in these other areas and work together as well. So the United Nations Association, why I got involved with them was because I didn't know about them, first of all, until a couple of years ago, and didn't know what they were. They're a nonprofit support organization for the United Nations. So they're not the UN. They were actually given a financial boost by Ted Turner when he sold CNN in the 1990s. And he started something called the United Nations Foundation. And he brought in the United Nations Association under that and another group called the Better World Campaign. The United Nations Association, has 200 chapters in the country. We've got 10 here in Southern California. There's, I think, 20 or so throughout California. Active chapters that not only are promoting the UN and its goals and values globally, which has always sort of been the historical part, but then really today it's promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. And what's really exciting for me is the idea of there's a program to promote the Sustainable Development Goals in our own local communities. And this is to apply this model of setting targets and getting people to be held accountable and all working together cross industry to achieve these targets. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for us to jump on board with this program and really make a difference and become identified as leaders in the movement. And we can talk about that a little more. There's also this flood of pastors that are coming out away from religion and have nowhere to go. And it just seems to me that they're a great opportunity for us to engage and to bring in and have them become engaged with our groups and find roles for them. And then obviously the humanist celebrant, community is growing, and that's exciting, so that we can reach out to humanist celebrants for our ceremonies and all of our formal events, and we don't have to, suffer the torture of living through a wedding or memorial service or anything else led by some religious pastor. And it's much more meaningful and personal. So there's a lot there to support. There's a great group called the Clergy Project, which is working in this space. And then, I think if we were to set a goal of, and I had it on the last page, a reach goal of, let's say, return our motto back from "In God We Trust" to "E Pluribus Unum," out of many one. How about that for a reach goal? Something like that would certainly help everybody realize that, no, we really are a country that was established on the separation of church and state from the beginning. It was only in the 1950s, in this Cold War era, that the country took this sharp turn to the right, and our groups and the ACLU and others allowed this sort of, horrible sort of takeover to happen, if you will, where it included changing our motto to "In God We Trust," getting in our currency and stuff. And we need that. We need to return. We need to return to this acceptance of all belief systems. We are not a Christian nation. We're a nation out of many, one. Let's talk about our allies for a minute. So we mentioned a number of them. The nonprofit groups in the Forbes list of the top 100. I've been very impressed with United Way. When I was in my corporate role, and I'm guessing many of you experienced the same thing, you probably ran into United Way as somebody that was working with the business community to do fundraising with employees and campaigns, and would take those funds and apply them locally to some charities or whatever. But I had no real idea of the level of engagement that United Way has. And working with the United Way just here in Orange County, I've been incredibly impressed. And they are the largest, I believe they're the largest of the top 100 nonprofits that are out there. So because they work with the business community, A, they have a lot of money coming in, and B, they're really engaged in a community that is an important community to get involved with. So they're a great conduit. And so I think it's really worth getting engaged and building bridges with the United Way. Then Habitat for Humanity, Doctors Without Borders, Planned Parenthood, Rotary Clubs. These are all groups that I think would make a lot of sense for all of us to really become more actively engaged with if we're not already. Talked about the religious groups that are fundamentally secular, the Unitarian Universalists, interfaith groups. And then there's all kinds of other marginalized and underrepresented groups, whether they're LGBT groups, minority and race-based, immigrant refugee groups, a lot of other groups that we may not otherwise be thinking about necessarily, but who really could be allies, certainly ones around the social justice arena. And there's so much going on in that space. Talked about media and entertainment. Many folks in that area really identify as non-religious, but like politicians, probably a little reluctant to stick their head out right yet and say, hey, I'm a flat out atheist, or, this is where we need to go, or humanism or whatever. But I think that's something we need to get to. And then we talked about the importance of young people and really reaching out to them at our high school and college campuses, which is why the, Secular Student Alliance, SSA, is so significant. I mean, probably along with the Secular Coalition of America, maybe one of the most important groups in our movement. And we need to support them. We need to really financially support them and try to work with them in our groups. So how can each of us, become more engaged? Well, we can certainly join more organizations, not just the ones we're in, not just the, few small ones perhaps, but we can join and also contribute and donate funds to these organizations that are all doing good things, whether it's Americans United for Separation Church State, the SCA, or whatever the group is. The main thing is just to find our passion that you're really interested in. Where do you really want to go make a difference? And find the group that is involved with that, volunteer and get active. Plan on spending some time really trying to matter, trying to make a difference. And and it's difficult. It's not easy, but it's doable. You just got to get going. And then I think small discussion groups are important for community. I think your folks do a really nice job with this, from what I've seen. But in my experience growing up in churches, this was one of the main things that really helped churches grow, especially large ones. I've got Saddleback Church right in my backyard here. And so, they are all about small groups, and that's really becomes the core of building then larger groups, larger churches. And, it's small groups that have folks of, common interest. They might be groups of parents with kids, or they might be single folks, or, whatever the interest is. But we need to be actively, I think, looking to form those kinds of groups. And as I said, activity groups are great, right? whatever the activity is, would be great as well. We talked about sort of spreading out the financial support in our conference that we had in November. And not sure if Judy was able to share the link yet to the YouTubes on these, but these were some of the organizations that we had present. And I think they gave, I believe it was about 5-minute presentations, but it just gives you a good thumbnail overview of some really cool things going on in our movement that some of us may not know about. So Humanist Global Charity, I hadn't heard of for, until just recently. And then Hank Pellissier is an awesome advocate of this. And Phil Zuckerman is the executive director. They used to be called something different, I think Brights maybe, or there was something like that. But they've established schools overseas, secular schools. They've do all kinds of, they're involved in over 300 projects. Separate projects of providing aid and helping folks in India, Africa, and a number of other countries. And it's really cool. If you haven't had them present, I would encourage that. Foundation Beyond Belief is awesome. Goes out and does, looks for active relief to hurricanes and disasters. And Tiffany Ho is the head of that. And then Recovering from Religion is a great project with Daryl Ray, the Secular Therapy Project as well. Mentioned Secular Student Alliance, Smart Recovery, the self-management and recovery training is one of the most effective and I think important, addiction recovery programs that are out there, and has large acceptance actually, and is growing. And so, they obviously don't focus on a 12-step, you can't do this on your own, you need a higher power method. It's completely the opposite. You have all of this within your ability to do this. These are behavioral issues. And, they're free workshops, and it's just a great program. We need to make sure that we get involved getting them into our prison systems, that we get them into all of our hospital systems and everything else where they are offering addiction recovery programs, so that people that are non-religious, have a better program, and frankly, one that has more effectiveness on the backside. The Translations Project is the translation of much of Richard Dawkins' work into many other languages, and now it's also the books from the Harris girls, Bailey Harris. I don't know if you've had a chance to hear them. They're also featured on our in the coalition, and you got to check out their talk in the link. They're so great. Now just moved from Utah to Santa Barbara, where Judy is. But they've written a number of books for kids that are awesome, and they're also being translated in this. And then the Clergy Project that we mentioned, such an important project as well. Talked about Only Sky Media. So, again, most of all, what we can do is just find your passion, find meaning in living out what you care about, and try to make a difference. And those are my comments now, and I'd like to open it up for any discussion and questions that anybody might have. And let me just share the list of resources. I have this available, and I can send this out so that you'll have it, or I can pop this into chat as well. These are some of the research reports that sort of, show where we're at lately and so forth. So, and then Phil Zuckerman's books. Joe Blankham, I'll just mention this. This is kind of cool. Joe is a professor at UC Santa Barbara, assistant professor of religious studies. Has undergone recently one of the largest surveys of the secular community ever done, 12,000 people. It's coming out with a book in June called The Secular Paradox, and it basically is talking about the paradox of how people leaving religion still want to have religious-like experiences or religious-like community, and and how you can't totally get away from all religion because of holidays and all kinds of things. So it's an interesting study, and it'll be a really good book, and he's great to have speak as well. So again, thanks for the time.
All right, thank you, David. Yeah, that was interesting. I hadn't heard of Only Sky Media before. I take it that's from the
Imagine song.
yeah, the Imagine song, right?
Yeah, it's so cool, right? Imagine
Right.
there's no heaven, above us only sky.
Yeah, actually, we're going to have Hank Pellissier talk here in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great.
So
Yeah, so who has questions or any thoughts? I'd love to hear thoughts or feedback or just, yeah, thoughts. It looks like we've got some hands
Yeah,
up. So
yeah.
go ahead, Alex.
Margaret, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. David, you need to update your bio because the Free Thought Society is so proud to have you as the newest board member. And you bring to the table a wonderful energy and passion for coalition building. So you are the official chair of the Free Thought Society Coalition Building Committee. And I just wanted everyone to know how much we love Dave and that this movement is better off having Dave at the helm of these coalition building efforts. And congratulations on a great talk. I'm very excited to see you on Saturday where we're going to meet up with Jamie Raskin in Pasadena.
Super excited. Yeah, and yes, Margaret, thanks for that. And just to be clear, the Socal Secular Coalition, in order to become a little more formalized, because we were pretty informal, decided to join forces with the Free Thought Society. And so we've become kind of a formal committee under the Free Thought Society, which is a national organization and has done so many great things, and including most recently the largest fundraising effort, I believe, Margaret, that's ever occurred in our secular community. I think over $500,000 raised to put a statue of Thomas Paine up in DC and possibly New York and some others. Yes. I'm not wrong. So we're super excited about that relationship. And, so that gives us the formal 501c3 sort of connections and so forth. And it's just been great.
And I just want to add that the Free Thought Society grew and became much more successful when our mission and goal and vision was to coordinate and cooperate with as many groups as possible. And it's a great method for other groups to have hosting ability for things that would be extremely costly if you did it alone. And, outreach, connect with other groups and say, do you want to co-sponsor something with me? Do you want to, be a partner in this particular event? So we're very proud at the Free Thought Society to have hosted events that have co-sponsors of 8 national groups was our top figure. And even just as little as 1 co-sponsor, but so helpful in getting the word out, growing your group. And I just, if anyone has any questions about that, please contact Dave or myself and we'll help you get in touch with other people.
Okay. George Kane, you've got your hand up. I think you're muted.
Yeah, okay. I'm in Minnesota, and I'm a member of both Humanist MN and Minnesota Atheists. And there are a couple of projects that I'm involved in that I thought I'd mention as far as beneficial activities, I think. One is a small group that we have that is involved in a letter writing campaign to the editors of the Minneapolis Star Tribune. And we focus on issues of church-state separation. And we've had pretty good success, had 15 or 16 letters printed in the last year that in the local newspaper, church-state separation issues receive very little attention. And the newspaper just refuses to publish letters to the editor about anything except articles that have appeared in their paper. So we frequently have to point out the church-state implications of stories in the news. And then another, there are 2 Toastmasters clubs that I'm involved with. One is in Los Angeles, Free Thinkers Toastmasters, which is an offshoot of Atheist United. And here in Minnesota, Free Thought Toastmasters, which is an offshoot of Minnesota Atheists. And both have been going on for years and work as a training ground in public speaking for members of the secularist community.
Awesome.
Okay, Ray.
Okay, Dave, thanks for your talk. I think it's a good topic. One of the reasons I agreed to be on the board of the Humanist community is because I would like to expand both our group and humanism in general. But I've always had a problem with some of the words and terminology. You talked about a couple of different groups, separation of church and state, where church here is associated with supernatural God or gods, and then recovering from religion, where again, religion is associated with the same supernatural and gods and things like that. And then I'd like to read a couple of statements from our bylaws. Article 1, name, the organization shall be known as the Humanist Community. Okay, fine, I'm good with that. Article 2, purpose, aims, position. Section 1, the purpose, the primary purpose is to establish a church based on the religion of humanism. Please comment.
Whose bylaws are those?
That's the bylaws of our humanist community in Silicon Valley.
And do you know when they were written?
You know the stuff.
The date on this is 2016.
Really?
Revisions proposed 2015, adopted 2016, January 17th.
1965 is when we started.
1965.
Yeah, the designation as a church goes way back.
And also, but one reason it has that language is because one of our most important members a long time ago considered humanism a church, and he doesn't want to let go of that.
Yeah, and I have a big problem with that because we are trying to separate ourselves from church and recover from religion. And we can't do that if we consider ourselves, you know, a church or a religious organization.
Yeah.
And so I have a problem with that. And
Understand.
I think this is something that needs to be discussed and changed.
Well, it's certainly worth discussion. And I think that, again, these are the kinds of issues that our community struggles with, along with terms of identity, right? My understanding is that actually, so the American Humanist Association, formed in 1941, I believe, came from the Unitarian Universalist Church. And that most of the early formers were from that. And that the original manifesto, the Humanist Manifesto, and the AHA's original position was that humanism was going to be a religion. And so there was early thought about humanism as a religion and a lot of discussion about that as well. And then you had Paul Kurtz come along, who then made a big distinction about secular humanism over humanism. That actually created a rift at the AHA, and that got him to go form CFI and Center for Inquiry. And today, that's where you still have tension between the two orgs, as I understand it. Margaret can probably comment more on that, but you know, so there's history there. My own particular, I hear your point, but I also personally, I mean, I don't have a problem with churchy words. I don't have a problem with spiritual words because we can re-own them, right? We don't have to succumb to religion's definition of spiritual, for example, just the term spiritual. Now, you know, that can generate a lot of debate, but personally, I'm somebody who would think that I get a lot of fulfillment and wonder and awe from a number of things, you know, but certainly I mean, I get it from playing soccer, frankly, but also from, looking at beautiful scenes and the ocean and everything else. And, so none of us knows if there's anything out there or not, I think it's important to always state that, especially in discussions with religious folks, that
Sure,
that's the first thing I
believe
say.
in science and reason, but I
Right.
fully agree that we don't
Yeah.
know all of the science yet.
We don't know it. And so I
And
think
spiritualism is another word that I have a problem with.
no, I
Connotes,
understand.
supernatural.
Right. I understand. So we have to work through those things. And I think we're all coming at it from different places, and that's where we're going to have some differences. Personally, I just don't, I tend to lean more towards wanting to be open to some of these ideas than closed. And frankly, I would love to see us have Saddleback Church that's a secular Saddleback Church and everything that it offers, with all of the groups and the counseling and the divorce recovery and the supporting the homeless and all of these things. I mean, I think that would be sort of and by the way, I'm not alone. I mean, I think Phil Zuckerman writes that in his book, Living the Secular Life. Greg Epstein in Good Without God writes about that as well.
But why
these are good
why
ideas.
can't you provide all those things without calling it a church?
Yeah, you may be able to. And so we're stretching the term church, just like we're stretching, some other things. But again, I used to have a real problem with Christmas, the term, and I don't anymore, because it's first of all, that was a secular holiday. and so I just sort of adopt the idea that and tell my friends, well, this really was a secular holiday, and all the gift giving and the mistletoe and all these things are completely secular in their origin. And Christianity came in and has tried to take many of these holidays from us. And part of what we need to do as a movement is reclaim our holidays, by the way. But the language matters, and I get it, and there's sensitivity to it. So anyway, good point though, Ray. I think it's a good point. I see other hands up.
Yeah, Carl, you have something to say?
Yeah. Wow. So much this last conversation triggered things off of me, because to me, one of the problems is, for want of a better term, acting hard ass. A lot of people, and what it does to me is it makes people sound like religious people. In other words, if you're going to be really hard about something, because I like your idea of pluribus unum, that includes in the movement itself, right? Look, and many people have said we ought to coalesce around other religions and work with them. And there are other people that think that's dealing with the devil or something. But anyway, one of the thoughts I had was, I didn't hear you mention ethical culture. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But they also are pretty humanistic. But in the meantime, it's there, and I maybe you figure they're not big enough or something, or
I think they're fading, but I think they were one of the early groups, Carl, that definitely got things going for us in a very positive direction. And I think they're strong. We don't tend to have many out here in the West, so I'm not as exposed to them probably as they're strong in Philadelphia and other places. And I think Margaret, again, who's both Philadelphia and LA or Orange County, is probably has more there. But you're right. And I think they're a great group. As by the way, I didn't also mention the secular Jewish groups.
Yeah.
We have in our coalition a secular Jewish community, and it turns out that about 80% of Jewish communities are fundamentally secular.
Yeah, I would suspect that too.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we actually hired an executive director and pounded away. And one of the challenges we had was that each of these groups you're talking about that are local here were self-sustaining, filled with a bunch of people that were stuck in their rut.
Yep.
And we couldn't get any, well, the problem was they didn't want to do any financial supporting at all, because they were kept alive by essentially streamlining themselves such that they would spend pennies a year on keeping the group together, which then of course forces the volunteer to work like hell until they get burned out.
Yep.
So anyway, I was wondering, how did these other groups get out of that syndrome, you know?
No, that's a
Like-
great point. And I see Judy nodding her head, with Santa Barbara. She's, seen a lot of the same things. And maybe Judy, you might, and Margaret too, you both might want to respond to that.
Sure. Yeah, I think I certainly can relate to what you're saying about you may have, we've got 125 members. It's only a handful of people that really put in the work and the effort, and the people who are really committed and have time available and have the skills available that you need. We have found that when the pandemic, having these Zoom meetings requires a lot less volunteer effort than having the in-person meetings, and that's been pretty grateful about that. I was thinking that, like with Atheist United, they were able to hire an executive director when they had a bequest, and his job is to make his position self-sustaining over a number of years, because it's expensive to hire a person full-time to run things. And Evan's doing a phenomenal job, and time will tell whether he'll be successful in having his role be self-sustaining. I also wanted to comment on Ray's point about church. And I think that if our bylaws, the Humanist Society of Santa Barbara, said we were a church, I would be all over that, trying to get rid of that. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm with you, Ray, on that. I know Dave's in a slightly different place, and with the UUs, we do have 2 UUs in town. We may be aligned on a number of issues, but they offered to let us hold our meetings there, well, for a charge. But when I went in, and it looks like a big church, I felt just a little uncomfortable there myself. I also wanted to mention that Joe Blankholm, the professor at UC Santa Barbara, specifically studies this tension between, should we call ourselves a church and get the benefits of being a church? Like, then you could have your celebrants can be ministers who, just like the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster is a legitimate church that can do marriages and things like that, right? Or do you say, no, we're not a church, and then are you giving up advantages that churches have that you don't have? And so Joe studies that. He did a talk for us maybe 3 years ago on are we a church, not a church? What are the pros and cons, and how are different organizations grappling with that? So you may want to talk to him about that. So
I have a coworker who is talking a lot about Flying Spaghetti Monster.
yeah, it's
Yep.
a real thing. You can, in
Yeah.
fact, my son's getting married in September, and he wants to have a humanist celebrant. And so Margaret was helping us figure out how do we go about doing that. And one of the things you can do is you can go online and you can become, I think it's a minister of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster for a fee. And then you are legal, in California to do the marriage. So I had suggested to our friend who lives in Santa Cruz, who's going to be doing the wedding, hey, you want to become a celebrant through the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster? And she's thinking it over, or some other options that Margaret offered. Okay, thank you.
Who's up next?
And this is Chuck. And thank you, Dave, for this speech. You made one comment today about the term atheist not being that acceptable by these groups we might want to partner with. You recommended going with humanists, I believe. I was wondering if you had any more context about that. I know atheism seems to have a whole different negative connotation these days.
Yeah, I mean, it does. Our movement, I think, started more as an atheist movement out of necessity. We had a need to separate out from church, and so we it's important that we have that legacy. But if our goal is to grow and is to integrate and become more accepted in society, then I mean, there's a pretty strong resistance if you come off as an atheist to anybody that is believing in some kind of spiritual being, because there's an immediate dichotomy set up. And so, I think that just as a practical matter, it and studies have shown that people just aren't as comfortable
Yeah.
with that as they are with a whole range of other terms. I mean, I'm a secularist. I'm a humanist. I'm a free thinker. I think that Jamie Raskin and Jared Huffman and many others will use those terms much more so than the others.
Yeah, I think humanist you need to define if you're going to
Yeah.
tell somebody that. Secular,
Right.
you might work.
Yeah.
That might be more acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And by the way, it's interesting that from what I'm seeing among the atheist groups, they're also struggling with this issue and are realizing that atheism itself doesn't define a belief system. It doesn't define a set of values. And they really are talking more and more about humanism. And now they're trying to figure out how do we get humanism and that discussion as more part of our discussion without changing our core identity. So that's interesting. Margaret, your hand's up.
Alex, you're muted.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to thank Dave for mentioning the American Ethical Union. We are hosting a big event on March 10th with the American Ethical Union. We're bringing in a social activist and Bollywood actor from India. So if you could research the meetup group, Socal Coalition, Free Thought Society, Backyard Skeptics, we have that particular event listed. They are trying to hang on to a large group of people who are interested in the ethical union. The place in Philadelphia is fully funded with a beautiful building. I bring in the speakers and they provide the building. It's a great co-sponsorship arrangement. I'm not sure if there is an ethical union in California, but they are a national group. So if you want to look up American Ethical Union, you might find some local partnerships that you can have.
That's great, Margaret. Who's up next? Daniel.
Oded, I just lowered your hand.
Oded. Okay, Oded.
Yeah, I think that being religiously atheist or religiously secular is not much different than being any kind of religion, because those people have crusades and want to get organization, and like the big corporations that merge one group with another, that means I don't see much difference between different organizations. Because as soon as you make like other charity organization, big organization, you lose the freedom. Because now you commit to agenda of different organizations. And the more organized organization, the toughest is the, what called the super organization, that's not much different than any kind of other religious organization or big corporation. So let's be freed of all kind of organization. No matter what the good, we can be humanist and ethical by ourselves. We don't have to get someone tell us how to be humanistic. Because it's up to the person, it's not up to the organization. Thank you. I'm a little bit childish, maybe.
It's an interesting thought. I hear your point. I hear your point, and I think there's certainly validity. I mean, this is one of the issues that I think our community has, is the idea of groupthink. People are resisting groupthink, having come out of religion, and that's why you have the term freethinker, right? So I'm not, and I do think that, I don't know that the answer for us is one big organization. I don't think I'm necessarily proposing that at all. I just think that the movement needs more acceptance and understanding and expansion and activism. I think, the Fortune 100 list is pretty revealing to me. If you look at that list, and I can bring it up or I'll pop it in the chat so you can take a look at it. But yeah, that's, wow. Look at all the religious organizations that are in that list based on revenues. And, we're not close. So, but I also think that with social media, that's why I think Only Sky is so important. I think there's new platforms, and with young people are not organizationally driven. They are social media driven. That there's a lot of other ways to reach folks and to grow our movement than simply organizationally. So I agree with that point in that way.
Okay, Daniel, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah. I want to say thanks to you guys here at the Humanist Silicon Valley organization. Every time I've heard Dave on a Zoom meeting like this, he's always had great ideas, and I never thought he had enough time to express it fully. So thank you for giving him the platform that he finally deserves. I have two quick thoughts and then one quandary. One, we were talking about atheism versus humanism. Yeah, I totally agree. Humanism has a set of values associated with it. Atheism, basically just we don't believe in God. And I, theist organizations and the conservative right have spent a lot of marketing money to make the atheism name really bad. And we're valued, or we're more abhorred than child molesters, I think, if you look at national polls. So I don't even identify as atheism anymore. Sure, I belong to several atheists, but I identify as humanist because I think that's a harder thing for them to attack. They're going to have to spend a lot more money to try to defile humanism than they did atheism. The other thing I noticed, Dave, in your talk was you said China is 90% atheist. I find that kind of fascinating because, to my limited history knowledge, I don't know of any other dictator that has successfully taken over a country without using religion. Yeah. So this is going to be interesting to see how this pans out. I guess the tool that he or they have discovered is multimedia, is cultural control. And that's actually better than religion. So we may see religion falling off as the favorite partner for dictators here, which would be slightly encouraging. It wouldn't be used as much. Anyway, and so to my final quandary, I think a lot about, we offer as a humanist community just about everything a church does. We do community, we have great goals of altruism, on down the list, but we don't capture the passion that you see in some really theistic organizations like the Holy Rollers and things like that, where you have the people wallowing in the aisles and talking in tongues, which I know a lot of that's, fake stuff, but the passion behind it, I think there's a segment of the population that goes to churches like this because they want to feel that emotional release. They want to feel that, adrenaline rush, essentially. And I don't know how we're ever going to do that as humanists, because we're basically a left-brain organization. We're not much on the emotional side. We have community stuff, but I know this is kind of a raw idea, and I'd love to hear anybody comment about that. How are we ever going to capture, or is this a segment of the population we're never going to get as humanists? There's always going to be the Holy Roller churches because they need that emotional support every Sunday, and we're never going to see them in our organizations. Don't know.
I think if I can, Daniel, thanks for the compliments, and it's great always seeing you as well. And I think that it's a really good question. And to me, it's part of the reason why I've really become more focused on the social needs issue. Mm-hmm. And getting involved with the United Nations Association has gotten me engaged with a bunch of activist people, mostly young, by the way. Half of their 20,000 members nationally are under 25, which was a big appeal to me. They have campus groups. They have model UN chapters at most schools in the country that we haven't even tapped. So there's this huge opportunity. They're all interested in social issues. They're all interested in climate, environment, in homelessness and income inequality, in the economic gaps, in trafficking. There's a host of issues. And for me personally, I'm really energized by just getting involved in those issues and getting involved in those programs. I didn't really have a chance to talk about that local, 2030 program, the local Sustainable Development Goal program, but I'm super pumped about that program and would love to talk to anybody about it. But it's what I've found is that it's given me a platform to go and talk to city council members, to go and talk to business leaders, to talk to nonprofit leaders across the board. I just had a meeting. I met somebody at an event on child marriage, which is a piece of human trafficking. We've got somebody in our board working to end child marriage in California. It's legal, and it's a form of human trafficking. It's amazing. And I met somebody who is a Republican candidate consultant, who recruits Republican candidates and tries to promote them. And we had the best discussion around this program and how it can be used by Republicans to better focus on solving problems and how it could be good for their politicians. So I'm working on the Dems as well. I don't know. It's just, I think that's one of the answers.
Nice. I think I need to become one of your assistants, Dave.
By the way, I was going to say, as a footnote, there is one other little piece that that is being copied over in the secular groups, and Dan Barker has formed a non-gospel choir. Oh, that's so cool.
They're trying to recruit right now and audition people, but they just take that high energy gospel music and put non-religious words to it. So it's awesome. Yeah.
It's so important. Music is so key. And I know, Daniel, you're part of the Voices of Reason, which I don't know if any of you all have heard Voices of Reason, but they're the secular music group out of LA. That's fantastic. And we definitely need more of that.
Thanks. Yeah, please check us out. We did a great thing. I was very proud of it. We took I'm losing the name of the choir, the Hallelujah Chorus, and we put secular words to it. So it's entertaining. Go to voicesofreason.net and you'll see it right there.
Yeah. Very cool.
Cheryl, you've got your hand up.
Yeah.
Cheryl.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me today. And Dave, thank you for this talk. I'm from Colorado, from the Boulder Atheists.
Great.
But I'm also a member of the Secular Hub in Denver and Jefferson Humanists in Golden, Colorado.
Great.
And I am from a religious background. So I remember, and I know all about churches. They have a very similar problem. And that's why you got all the different denominations, because nobody ever believes the same thing about the Bible or religion.
Right.
So they go off and create all these denominations. And when I decided I was an atheist, I went and joined the Boulder Atheists and realized the same thing. There's no one atheist that believes the same thing. And so I think it's just inherent in belief systems. But I do, the one thing that we started with the Boulder Atheists is we joined the American Atheist group, and we are a Colorado State advocacy team, which is, it's a pilot program through the American Atheist group. And this was our first year during our state legislature. We've been watching all the bills coming through and actually practiced and submitted testimony, and that's been a huge learning process for us. So I think that's very important for a secular organization to be involved in that state advocacy.
You bet.
And Dave, I would actually like to be a part of something that's bigger. If you and all the other leaders of secular organizations would get together and just start coming up with best practices for what our organizations can agree upon.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the marginalized groups and social needs. I think that's why we do not have much diversity in our groups here in Colorado. We're mostly white, and we're not really focusing hard on the social needs of people that are really needing a lot of help. So they do go to the churches, which are doing a great job of that.
Yeah. Boy, so many great points. And by the way, I've attended, reached out to Secular Hub and the Colorado Springs group as well, and been a part of some of their groups. And I've been excited to see, they're one of the few groups, by the way, the Secular Hub, that has their own facility in the secular world in America. There's not too many of our groups that own buildings, or there's a few. Somebody needs to put a list of them out there, right? So we know. Yeah, and I've thought of you folks as a sort of a logical place for a coalition in Colorado because of the various groups and everything that are there. So, yeah, I'd love to, I'd love to work with you on that. I think part of the idea that we had joining Margaret's group with Free Thought Society was to actually, she just said that it sounds like I'm going to be heading up a coalition building team. So we're going to reach out to other groups in other areas in the country to see who's interested and see what we can do to help with coalition building and best practices. So yeah, would love to, talk to you more about that.
How can I connect with you on that?
I will put my email in the chat right now. I would love to hear from you and anybody else interested.
All right, Carl.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question, Dave. Could you share your slides with us?
Yeah.
So we don't have to rely only upon the video, because you can't do links on slides.
I know.
And the second thing is, we didn't talk much about what you said. I've always had a kind of a mixed feelings about this term "good without God."
Yeah.
I'm not clear, and I just wondered if maybe we could have a quickie conversation surrounding around that, especially those that have thought about it a little bit.
Yep.
I'm not saying it's bad, but I don't know if it's the right thing to coalesce, to me.
Yeah, good question, Carl. I'm glad you brought that up. Oh, I'm sorry. I got to click share. There we go. Who's got some thoughts about that? Who else wants to chime in on that? Oh, it sounds like we've got hands raised. Go ahead, Alex. I'll let you moderate.
I guess Margaret, you're up.
Margaret, are you?
Oh, yes, sorry about that.
worries.
I just put things into the chat. I wanted to compliment Voices of Reason. They are so fantastic. And so I put a link to where they performed at our May Day for Humanity. And yeah, I'm so happy that Dan Barker is putting together a similar type of Voices of Reason. So thanks for mentioning that.
You bet.
On the subject of mottos, I've always felt a little uncomfortable with good without God. It sounds like we're apologizing or asking people to like us. I do like your comment about pressing for e pluribus unum as.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's such I don't know if anybody's been able to read the book One Nation Under God. It's one of my favorite books by Kevin Cruz, who's a Princeton historian. And I would love, one of my goals is to see that book turned into a documentary. I think it would help our movement big time, because it tracks this whole process from the 30s all the way through the 50s, and then all the way up even till more recent times, and how it was that this all happened. And how it was, and what the real thing. So you have The Family. If many of you are familiar with The Family, remember there was a TV series on it, and there was a book, Jeff Charlotte, The Family. Okay, that's one of the big influencers, right? That happened is The Family coming in and influencing politicians, and they still today run the presidential prayer breakfast. That's today still, and so then you have the whole Billy Graham evangelical movement, where he became under Eisenhower, which introduced prayer into our government. Basically, we didn't have invocation before that. He introduced the presidential prayer breakfast. It was under Eisenhower that all of this changed. and Billy Graham became his minister. You had that, and then there was this other amazing phenomenon with a preacher who got hired by a church in LA, who was like a used car salesman. I forget the guy's name, and came out to turn the church around, get it out of the red into the black, and in the process created a marketing campaign that fundamentally changed the theology of Christianity from social gospel to help others. And, like Jesus said, rich man won't get to heaven, a bunch of things in the talking about social gospel, where much of Christianity was back in the day, charities, orphanages, and all these things, doing good, to focus on individual salvation, salvation between man or woman and God. And what the social gospel tied to was socialism. And so they linked it basically with socialism and communism. And they said individual salvation is much more in line with our ideologies of, freedom under God. It's rugged individualism, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And what really happened in this whole period of time while all of this occurred is the ability for big business to come in and use this methodology, use this religion, use this shift for its advantage, and to cut down labor and to promote capitalism. It's really a fascinating, look at how it all happened. And, it happened, and it shouldn't have happened. And the ACLU was focused on civil rights at the time. And we just it slipped under the radar, and too much of the country was caught up in this stuff. And it really does need to come back, because it's an error, big time. And Thomas Paine and Jefferson, and this is not how we were set up. And look at all the problems we're having now as a result. So I think there's a real opportunity to message around E Pluribus Unum, that we are a country of many, out of many, that pulls us all together. And that can be something that can maybe that is a better tagline, something in there. Yeah.
Okay, Margaret. Margaret.
Can I interrupt quick 6 second, Dave? I noticed there was a book that I read recently that detailed a lot of that stuff you were talking about, the early history of corporate America. There's a book by Kevin Michael Cruz called One Nation Under God, How Corporate America Invented Christian America. It's
that's the book I was talking about.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for the interrupt.
Yeah, no, you bet.
And I actually would take one step further in the harm of ceremonial deism. You see, the money, the language on our money, in God we trust, the inclusion of one nation under God, and all of the references have actually been deemed ceremonial deism. Well, when our government gives a nod to a delusion such as God, we opened the gates for other okay delusions, one of which we're living with right now, the delusion and conspiracy theories that are abounding in our society because of our freedom of speech, but also because the government has allowed this particular ceremonial deism to flourish and be condoned. So I just see it as the step towards people not critically thinking and accepting things like a God belief.
Yeah, good point.
I just wanted to comment also that I think one of the problems with the nation here is that we have this feeling that faith is a virtue.
Yeah.
It's something you fall back on when you've got nothing else, maybe, but
yep. Faith is another interesting term to me. I kind of like the term. I have faith. I think we're crazy not to have faith. We don't. One of my favorite sayings anymore is, the more I know I don't know. What we really know is so limited to what we don't know. I have faith in mankind. I have faith in humanity. I have faith in myself. I have a lot of faith. I just don't have a faith in stuff I can't see or that science doesn't really validate much. yeah. So back to the semantics issue, you know.
Yeah, when we use the phrase "know" as in "I know something," that's a very flexible word.
It
You know,
is. It is.
I can't prove that yesterday really existed. I remember it, but that could be wrong. So there you are. You know, they're just degrees of certainty.
Exactly. Scott just told me I was still sharing my screen. Thanks, Scott.
Huh.
No, I wasn't aware of that. Any other comments, or anybody else has anything to add? Good discussion.
I saw Judy raise her hand.
Yeah, Jerry, Dana. You had your hand up before, and you got interrupted.
I don't know what happened to it, but at any rate, a couple of things. One is, I think you may have forgotten one organization, namely Freedom from Religion Foundation.
No, I did mention them, but yeah.
I didn't see it anywhere on your slides.
Yeah, it was there.
Oh, okay.
It was
There was
there, and
something-
they're great. I mean, I love FFRF. I love Dan Barker, and you know, when I first his book, Losing Faith in Faith, I think was the first book that I read when I basically left Christianity, and I really related a lot to his path, you know, as a minister, and the challenges that he went through. And
You'll come back and tell us about that one day, right?
I'd be happy to. But he's you know, but FFRF as an organization, I've been to their conferences, and love them. They tend to be a little more, you know, east, you know, based than west. And then they're more focused on lawsuits. You know, they're a group that's focused a lot on lawsuits, which we need, right? I mean, that's a need. We definitely need these folks out there lobbying for us, fighting the good fights on church-state separation issues. I mean, that's a super important thing. And like Cheryl mentioned regarding advocacy, I mean, the advocacy arm of the case model is key. And it's a super great place for us to engage. And also, it's a place where we can, even though we line up in all the studies and surveys, and I just put a bunch of them into the chat, show that humanists and secularists line up a lot with Democrats typically. We're also very independent. We're a lot of NPPs. I'm personally a no party preference. And that's the largest growing group in the country also politically. And, you know, but we need to engage Republicans as well, right? And if we're going to get things done, if we're going to get legislation done, especially at a city level or at the school boards or anything else, we have to engage in dialogue and find common areas of concern with Republicans as well as Dems. So it's all good.
One other thing, the business about left brain versus right brain, and yeah, our humanist community is quite intellectual, and we tend to talk, and we don't generally do music and so forth. But every now and then somebody comes up and complains that we don't do more music. So obviously that we're not 100% united on that. And there was a time we got some musician to come. It might have been Dan Barker, and that had the largest audience ever. It was like 111 people.
Yeah.
Way pre-pandemic. Okay.
We're missing out by not having music. I know Daniel loves music. I mean, I'm a huge music lover. Yeah, I mean, it's something we all miss, right? And I love music in my normal life, but it would be so cool to have. I mean, I have a secular music channel. Do you? I mean, you know, playlist of cool songs like Chicago's "I've Been Searching So Long." I mean, what a great song. And you know, just a whole ton of songs, you know, like that.
Well, yes. Speaking of which, after 9/11, one member of our group, then not now, she wanted to go to a memorial, and she couldn't find a non-religious memorial, so she created her own.
Yeah.
In San Francisco Golden Gate Park, and which had an attendance of maybe 100 people or so, which wasn't bad, I thought, because it didn't have much publicity. And she chose 2 songs to play during that time. One was Imagine, and one was Blowing in the Wind.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I'm
Dan
done.
Barker also has a great sense of humor.
Yes.
Part of his
Yeah.
appeal, I think.
That's true.
Yeah,
Anybody?
and in terms of the phrase church, it was pointed out at one point when someone was complaining that we were meeting in a building that wasn't wheelchair accessible at a college. We changed that, but at the time, as we had an executive director at the time, and he pointed out that we are a church which makes us practically unsuable. So it's kind of
Yeah, it's
kind of having
interesting.
the devil on your side.
I think Joe Blankham is onto something with his, book on the paradox.
Mhm.
That we are living in a number of paradoxes, I think. And look, on the one hand, our theme is openness. Our theme is acceptance. Our theme is freedom of belief, right? Well, that means freedom of belief. Freedom, if you want to believe in, something, our values support your freedom to do that, right? And yet we're uncomfortable being around you if you tell us that you are a believer in something. And I do think that's a conundrum. And some of us kind of, we need to try to move, outside of that or beyond it, to where we really can become much more of this bridge. I was talking now you got me thinking songs as a bridge over troubled water, but I do think that our value system is a total a bridge that can cut through a lot of the polarization we're seeing today in society, because it gets us focused on values. And again, and I don't mean to, I haven't really hardly talked about United Nations much, so I'm kind of proud of myself because I'm all over that. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is what drew me to the organization in the first place, the realization that the UDHR, which is the most translated document in the world, has 30 fundamental human rights, is the basis of the United Nations, and is really the basis for which all countries more have agreed on that than on anything else ever. That completely maps up to our humanist values. In fact, Eleanor Roosevelt, who helped create the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, used one of the original humanist manifestos as part of the inspiration for that, along with our own Bill of Rights. So I just think when we focus on these kinds of social issues and these sorts of values that are about fairness, equity, openness, etc., those are not partisan. Those really are cross-partisan and can be an answer to a lot of the divide that's out there today. And again, an opportunity for us to step forward and help be sort of a shining light in some of this toxic environment, right, that's out there right now.
I wonder sometimes, how can it, if they're concerned about violating someone's religious beliefs, how can they prevent me from recommending where a woman could get an abortion if I'm working at Planned Parenthood?
Right.
Isn't that a violation of my humanistic values?
It is, and obviously, the abortion itself is rooted in the whole notion that they believe that that's murder, of a soul and a human, because a human is formed at conception. So I mean, there's that one's tough. Looks like Oded has a hand up.
Oh, Oded, you're muted. Your hand is up and you're still
That the people in Canada about human rights. That the people in Canada have human right to not get vaccine and don't lose their job if they don't, or if they're not protected by the UN human rights, what call it, declaration. That means when you try to say that human right is sometimes is right for one people and not right for the other.
Right.
And so human rights, do they have the right in Canada, maybe in other countries, not to get the vaccine? And the UN don't say anything about that. They don't blame Canada of breaking the human right. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have rights to, but then rights have consequences, right?
So what
And
we
and
do?
so well, I mean, I think the answer is in many places, it's that you can't go here if you aren't vaccinated, right? You can't come to this country, you can't get on this plane, you can't come into this restaurant if you're not vaccinated,
You
right?
can do the city, which is definitely human right.
Excuse me?
Free movement.
Well,
Going to your car and go from
I
one
mean,
place to another.
within boundaries, right? I mean, that's society's role, is to set up boundaries.
Who determine what are the boundary? Every country have its own.
Right, and that's
So what the
hopefully
United Nations
you
good
either have a dictator doing it, or you have people doing it in democracy. And it seems more fair and equitable when people in a democracy are able to do it and make those decisions, as opposed to a dictator. And I mean, there's always a line between individual rights and where does that extend, to others. Look at free speech and hate speech and all of this, right? I mean, there's all of those, to where you start offending others, then you start crossing the line. And so those are the lines that we need to become more aware of, and I think really are relevant in our discussions, is where are these lines and boundaries?
Because I see the human right of women, which now the month of the woman in Afghanistan, I don't see any UN resolution about doing human rights for the woman in Afghanistan.
I mean, I'm no UN expert. I'm sure that there are resolutions everywhere. I know that our own group, my Orange County chapter, with the month of March and the month of women's rights, is actually has a whole program around Afghan women. It so happens to provide support and resources and everything.
This is America, but not Pakistan.
No, I get it, but there are organizations that are trying to reach out and help women really around the world. I mean, there's some really cool women's organizations out there that I've run into. I don't know if you're familiar with Zonta. Anybody? ZONTA, International Women's Organization. Awesome. Yeah, they're very organized. Chapters everywhere. Chapters here in our, we use they have a building in Costa Mesa that we're using for meeting rooms. And so there's lots of, in that space in particular, there seems to be even more and more, focused on women's rights. We just had a call with our chapter yesterday that we had somebody who's just started a nonprofit called 2030 Man. The 2030 Man. And 2030 is the year that the Sustainable Development Goals expire. They started in 2015 and they go to 2030, and we set targets, global targets for 2030. We're trying to achieve them globally. And so her nonprofit she started on the 2030 Man is about training and educating men on how they are part of the solution to the feminist movement, to women's rights, and how to educate boys, and just all of this language and discussion around the importance of having women, become equal in our societies.
Yeah, you say it. Speaking is free. Action needs energy.
Yes.
I don't see any action. I see a lot of speaking all over the world. And speaking is not this great organization that can collect money, they can have lawyers and all this stuff. But do we have anything to convince the Taliban to give the women the freedom that they deserve? Nobody wants it. We didn't take the military that controls the Taliban out just to get its own political agenda, probably. And my point is, to get something done, you have to take action. If you just talk and create big organizations that talk louder, it's still talking, it's not action.
Yeah, don't disagree. Don't disagree, Oded. A lot of action is needed. I do think there's a lot happening, though, that we're not aware of. And by the way, that's one of our problems also, is the back to the marketing and the poor marketing. It's not just us, it's across the board. Media today suffers from putting out good stories because that doesn't sell, right? All that sells is this polarized extremism. And but there's a lot of good stories and there's a lot of good things happening, and we have to figure out a way to get those good stories out. And I think, again, Only Sky, places like that, forums like that, are opportunities for that kind of thing. So
What I believe is, if there is some poorness, you can help the poor person that you see in the street directly. You don't need to go to organization, because the organization take 90% or more of the resources just to have the organization.
right, I hear you.
Do it as a man to man or woman to woman or whatever, people to people. But I think this is the only way. And to get it, you have to have some belief that if you do something good, you feel good and the other person feel good. And this is not organized.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other comments or, Dana Gary's got your hand up again.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of good news, I just wanted to mention, do you know Yes Magazine?
No, I don't.
Yes Magazine is from Bainbridge Island, near Seattle.
Okay.
It's every 3 months, and it's either all good news or almost all good news.
Okay, that's cool.
And they've been going on for decades. I think there are other newspapers, no, maybe not newspapers, but there are other media besides them. They're just none of them are mainstream.
Yeah, well, we could use more of that, right? I think we'd all agree.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, Paul just brought it up. Cool. I'll check it out.
Okay. Well, we're almost out of time anyway, so it's been a wonderful talk.
Let me comment. I've forgotten where the raise your hand button is. I just want to comment. You mentioned other public statements. Just a few years ago, we published printed a little booklet, which included the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Humanism and its aspirations. The big one that we left out, from my perspective, was the convention, CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which should have been in there.
Yep.
Maybe some of the others in this group were more involved in producing this than I was, but there's some good statements out there that we ought to, that I think it's useful to promote and get out into the public more.
Yeah, speaking of which, I'm glad that the UN Declaration of Human Rights get as much attention as it does. I just wish that the UN DRIP, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, also got more attention.
Yeah, there's some projects for us there.
There's so much to be done, and let me look. I mean, I think it would be wrong to not mention what's going on today in our world, right, with Ukraine and the impact, and from my perspective on what it means for the UN. I think it's showing some serious design problems when you have Russia on the Security Council with a veto vote, and a lifetime membership. So personally, I think something needs to change. Just like we need changes in our own. And we haven't had an amendment in our Constitution for how many years now? 70 years, something like that. We need some changes. They need some changes. There's changes that are needed to address how we're going to, be moving forward. But clearly, we need to move forward together. Again, it's another reason I like the idea of the UN. It's a coalition, really, right? It's the same thing. It's a coalition pulling countries together and pulling everybody together now around these goals for the world, which are really awesome. And we all agree that with climate change, that could get rid of all of us within 80 to 100 years. We have to deal with that as a global community. COVID has certainly brought it out. These are we got issues there. Now you've got this whole thing about what's democracy versus autocracy, and how do we have sustainable democracies, and what do we have to do to make sure that we have them? So a lot of good issues. It's all a work in progress, right? And everything's about progress. I don't know, we're making some progress. And I just would love, I'm impatient, as I'm sure most of you are, and I would love to see us make more. But I would just say I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you all today just some thoughts and to have the discussion. I think it's been a really good discussion as well. And so thanks for all your involvement and your interest, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Alex, Dana wants to say something.
Oh, Dana, yes.
Am I alone? Oh, thank goodness. Yes, I do have a comment to make and an observation. I sort of think that, cultures have ways of expressing what they really hold dear. And I'm thinking in terms of like art and literature, and I'm thinking that Scrooge is sort of the main emblem for atheists and others that are not religious. And Dickens somehow made him like immortal, and he's a very important person, and that he personifies a lot of negative qualities that we don't want in people. And I'm wondering how the humanists can replace that kind of icon with something more benevolent, something that shows their human side. And also, I would like to state that I think the name ethical culture is a lot more attractive somehow than humanist. Anyway, that's my comment. And these are very powerful beliefs, kind of fundamental belief systems that many, many people have. And so I think that needs to be taken into account.
Yes, very good comment. And it sounds like you're not a big fan of the Happy Humanist logo. as the main way that we all want to be depicted.
Really? Is there something? Is there
a happy humanist? Yeah, you didn't see it on my presentation. It was on every slide.
I must have been stepped out of the room for a moment.
It looks like a human. It looks like an H, with the
hands up. Yeah.
Oh, that guy.
Oh, there it is. It's, Paul's got it up on the screen there. Yeah.
We had a member who insisted the trouble with it was that the head was not connected to the body.
Well, when I said icon, I didn't mean something on the computer.
An image, but it's a great point. Yeah, and so far the image we have for the Socal Secular Coalition is a bunch of happy humanists all together in kind of in a rainbow color. So that was the best we've come up with yet. But you're right, and we need better iconography. We need better music and art and all of that expressing as an important part of what we're all about. For
Thank
sure.
you.
Let me just comment this letter that I mentioned at the beginning of the hour from, I don't know how to pronounce our new executive director's name. Is it Nadia?
I think so. Something like that. Yes. I don't know if it's Nadia or Nadja.
Yeah. It's a good letter, 4-page letter. Mm-hmm. And she motivated me to send another contribution. So
good.
If you got it, read it, send money.
I don't know if any of you have had a chance to hear her yet, but I'm very impressed, I have to say. And I'm somebody who was not a fan of what the AHA did with Daryl Dawkins, Richard Dawkins. I'm going basketball here.
Us too.
And you too. And,
Yeah.
and so that was frustrating. And I talked to Roy Speckert, and it was just frustrating to me where they were headed. And but I like what I see, and I think she brings a whole fresh approach to things. She doesn't come from our movement at all, frankly. Has almost didn't even know about it. And so it is important. And I've the reality that American Humanist Society, AHA, has their own strategic plan that's on their website that's been buried, and they never talk about it, and you never see it. And these top 5 initiatives that are out there, I mean, that should be a front and center discussion for a lot of folks and groups, and people ought to be doing it. And one of those has to do with, hey, we need to hook up better with our groups out there. Okay, yeah, that's probably true. But she's all about it. She's all about really, living out a lot of those things. And she's really all about making a difference out there. And so she's very much in line with, Foundation Beyond Belief, getting all behind it. And all of these sort of social causes that, are going, is where humanists need to be. And so I'm happy to see that sort of emphasis and focus, and hopefully somebody new like that can come in and help shift some things.
Yeah, well, our planning and forum planning committee is all listening, and I would like to see her be one of our speakers in the near future.
Absolutely, yeah.
And make sure that you're in one of the rectangles on the screen when she speaks.
Definitely.
Speaking of which, Carl, if you're there, we have a program committee meeting at 1:15.
Oh, all right.
And I'm going to take off now. Get ready for that. It's been a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.